This is New Home Insights, the John Burns Real Estate Consulting Podcast. I'll be your host, Dean Worley. As the title promises, we're going to bring you insights into everything housing, latest trends, innovations, observations, and issues of the day. We'll bring in colleagues here at John Burns and also some major industry players from all across the country. This podcast is going to be quick, fun, but also hopefully make you think. So see you here every couple of weeks. Now let's get to it. Hey, welcome to New Home Insights Podcast by John Burns Real Estate Consulting. I'm your host, Dean Worley. Today, we're going to talk about something called the missing middle, something I hope you're hearing a lot more about. I know I have recently. It's this idea of building new housing that's geared towards more middle-income households in a market environment where affordability is increasingly just a huge hurdle and a major concern. To help me do that, I have Dan Parolek from Opticos Design here in California. He's the guy who originated this term, the missing middle, and he lives it and he breathes it in his work every day. Dan, why don't you say hi to the folks and introduce yourself?
Hi, Dean. Thanks for having me today. My name is Dan Parolek. I'm the founding principal of Opticos Design, and we are an architecture and urban design practice based in Berkeley, California.
Right on. So let's get right to it. Let's start with kind of first premises, right? Because a lot of folks out there maybe haven't heard of this yet. They will, but they haven't yet. So broadly speaking, what is this concept of the missing middle?
Yeah, so the missing middle housing refers to the range of housing types, housing projects between the scale of single-family homes and mid-rise apartments or condo buildings. And these range of housing types like the duplex, fourplex, cottage court have existed historically in neighborhoods, and we've stopped building them. And what we found in our research and our work with the missing middle types is that they do deliver many of the lifestyle amenities that you might get if you were living in a condo building, a larger condo building, but with more of the quality and experience of living in the single family home. And I do want to emphasize that to us, first and foremost, the middle in the missing middle housing concept relates to the scale, the form, and the product type. And secondarily, and it's still important, is that these types are an effective way to deliver attainability to middle-income households.
So let's tease that out a bit, right? So who are the folks that is kind of specifically meant to target?
Yeah, I think as we think about this, we kind of think about it in there's two focus markets for the missing middle. And the first one is there's this tremendous pent up and growing demand for walkable urban living. And we say that walkable urban living at a neighborhood scale in this context versus downtown. But they're the two biggest market segments, the millennials and the baby boomers. Like there's a lot of research that has shown that these two big market segments want this type of walkable urban living, and they're not being given that as a choice or in the quantities that the market is asking for. And why do those market segments want it? They first and foremost are looking for walkability. We're also seeing that they're fairly discerning in terms of buyers and renters, and are looking for unique product type and sort of just a sort of different living style. And they kind of don't want the single family detached house or even what I guess we consider kind of the generic tuck under townhouse that you see being built everywhere. They want something different, and they're open to ownership alternatives. They might be open and interested in buying a duplex and renting out that second unit as an income generation, and also longing for a sense of community. And the second aspect of it is just looking at the tremendous shift in household demographics that are not having their needs met. Just simple things like the fact that 30% of all households in the country are single-person households currently. And I can guarantee that 30% of the houses on the market in any city or region are not designed and built specifically to meet the needs of a single person household. And then the fact that 75 to 85% of households will not have children by 2035, and just this rapidly aging population. And so we see this huge disconnect. Even a recent ULI study on attainable housing by the Turner Center showed that 50% of all new homes are 4 bedrooms or more, and that less than 7% of new homes being built and sold are under 1,400 square feet. So you can immediately see sort of the disconnect between where the household sort of demographics shift are happening and sort of what's being delivered to the market. And just a couple other points is, they can be for sale or for rent. And they are also, like, we've worked with a handful of builders to target an entry-level market in terms of an attainable price point that's sort of eluding many builders in many markets.
So you're basically saying, so it's not so much a top-down kind of model, is it? It's a bottom-up. You're seeing that there's unmet demand there from these kinds of households, and builders just aren't building product that's appropriate for them. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think number one, cities' regulations are often in the way to enable builders to deliver these missing middle housing types, and secondarily, it's just trying to turn a big ship is often really hard, so change is slow. So we're finding that a lot of builders are shifting, but not shifting quick enough.
Yeah. How much of it, though, is purely in terms of product? So again, it's sort of product led more than I thought, to be honest with you. The missing middle concept, really, I think it sort of intuitively people think of middle income, right? But you're saying it's that's sort of a secondary factor within it. Is actually more of a product oriented kind of solution. So are builders just missing their markets? Is it a situation where you have these buyers and renters who just aren't being serviced by the market that's out there?
Yeah, I think it's like I said. I think there are small changes that a lot of builders are making to try to deliver these missing middle housing types. And I think from a for sale product standpoint, the lowest hanging fruit is what we call the cottage court, which is a series of small detached houses around a shared community green space. And we're starting to see builders across the country trying to sort of explore that as an alternative to, hitting these different market segments and delivering sort of attainable price points. But, it's important that, they're needing to think creatively about parking. They're needing to think about smaller units. And then when I say small, I'm saying like 1,000 square foot and under, and how does communal space sort of tie into that conversation? And we're also seeing some builders delivering variations of a townhouse as kind of another example of kind of the lower hanging fruit with the missing middle product types.
So in terms of product types, though, so we have cottages, we have denser. I mean, are we talking like you mentioned essentially anything fair game from single family detached up between single family detached homes and sort of mid rise?
Yes.
But I mean, so we're going to have elevated surface flats, we're going to have wrap apartments, anything like that. Everything is fair game.
Yeah. Well, so I would say that. The sort of wrap apartments wouldn't fit into our classification of missing middle. It typically stops at the 2 and 3 story scale, still type 5 stick construction. A fourplex in our mind, if more builders can figure out how to deliver the fourplex with 2 units on the ground floor and 2 units above that, we feel that there's a really large pent-up demand for this type of housing. And I think that the interesting aspect of sort of that fourplex type is that it's still a house scale building. It just happens to have 4 units inside of that house scale. And I know there's sort of additional challenges that come along with, condominium associations that might be necessary, additional liability. But I think the fourplex in particular can deliver a really nice variety of ownership alternatives from anybody from downsizing baby boomers to young families or single person households. And that sort of stacking of units is kind of where I think the builders need to go and have been very reluctant for good reason to kind of take a step in that direction. But I think that's really where they're needing to go.
Is your concern for, you mentioned, so you're sort of excluding, 4 or 5 story product. Is that from a concern from the hard cost? You just, and you will miss that middle in an income sense if you build that kind of product. Is that the issue?
I think part of it's that 4 and 5 story product type is not missing in most markets. It's actually being delivered in pretty high quantities. So it doesn't kind of meet that missing criteria. And the other thing is I think one of the primary reasons that the missing middle concept has caught on is because it's given communities, it's given builders, it's given architects the way to talk about housing choices in a way that doesn't sort of get people up in arms, like if they start having a conversation about increasing densities or upzoning or even introducing multifamily units. So it's sort of this house scale that is much more approachable and attainable for a lot of community members.
Yeah. I asked a question a minute ago about kind of this a little bit chicken and egg, isn't it? You mentioned a lot of these demographic types that are wanting these kind of product and aren't being serviced, aren't finding them in the kind of areas, walkability that they want. Is part of it also, though, that they really want this product, or is this product appealing to them in part because it is more affordable and it's if they had their choices, maybe they wouldn't?
I think it's what I like about the missing middle product types is you can have the exact same type, sort of even the same general unit layout, and you can simply modify it with more embellished architecture, higher quality finishes, and maybe a little bit more square footage. And you can hit an upper end market with it, but you can also hit a sort of an entry level, more attainable price point for entry level buyers as well, with just very minor changes. So I think that's what I like, and what we've seen in sort of application of missing middle product types is we have developers that come in and say, I want to carve out a niche for myself and differentiate myself from my competitors, but I want to hit this high end price point. And so they're delivering them. And then there's a lot of other of our clients that, like the Muse Homes in the Daybreak community in Salt Lake City, where they were struggling to hit an entry-level price point based on rising land costs, materials costs, labor costs, and they couldn't even deliver a conventional townhouse at a price point that was attainable for an entry-level buyer. So it sort of hits both ends of the spectrum of price point.
That's a good segue actually into location then, right?
Yes.
Are there some locations that are just better suited to missing middle product than other locations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, because I think one of our points is that missing middle housing performs best when it's what we call a walkable urban place. Now, that can range from an existing historic sort of downtown adjacent neighborhood, or it could be in an evolving suburb where the city has made some policy to introduce walkability and more compact living in an evolving suburb. And I think what we see is that based on the level of walkability, that you can dial up unit size, you can add more parking in a more suburban environment, but the types are adaptable to meet sort of two pretty different contexts that are both trying to achieve walkability and deliver that to the market.
You've kind of answered then my next question then, which is this idea of suburban, which John Burns, my boss, kind of coined a few years ago. This idea of this kind of product we're talking about, a little more urban product within more suburban locations. So missing middle, it sounds to me, works perfect. You definitely intend for it to be in those kinds of locations.
Absolutely. I think that we've been a little bit surprised that I think when we created the concept now 7 years ago, we were thinking that would be a range of product types that would be primarily targeted for infill opportunities in existing neighborhoods. But what we're seeing is there's just as much, if not more, demand in these areas that John calls suburban. And it's because a lot of suburban communities are realizing that there's demand. They want to retain residents, they want to attract residents, they want to attract businesses, and so they're finding out ways to enable for builders to deliver these types in their communities.
Have you found? Okay, here's my problem. It seems like the locations that fit this suburban idea are very often few and far between. You need the walkability, the proximity to things like retail or things like employment. That's sometimes pretty hard to find in suburban locations. Have you found that? Are you finding a lot of locations that fit?
Yeah, I think where we're seeing it most successful in suburban context is where there's either dead or dying strip malls or malls that where you get, 10 plus acres of land area where you can create that complete walkable neighborhood. That's kind of where we've seen it most successful, and the missing middle's integrated. There may be a larger sort of 4 or 5 story vertical mixed use component to that, maybe along the corridor, but then it transitions down in scale to this missing middle, that 2 and 3 story scale, as it transitions into a lot of times a single family neighborhood. We've also seen some really, in places like Austin and even in Phoenix, some really creative adaptive reuses of turn of the century, 1960s, 1970s strip malls that are now adding a level of walkability and sort of the food amenities, the retail amenities, the bars and restaurants that people are looking for in terms of walkability.
I was going to say, turn of the century in Phoenix, wouldn't that be a saguaro?
Yes,
that was
not quite that actually. But it's interesting to see that, and that's something new that we've seen in those sorts of markets. And I think that's part of developers getting creative in terms of delivering, a certain range of walkability and destination within an environment that may have historically been highly dependent on the car.
And the policymakers out there, they're okay with it? You found some acceptance there?
Oh yeah, we're. I think that there's big cities that have been grappling with and trying to figure out how to enable missing middle, ranging from Nashville has been a long time proponent and have been instituting missing middle for I think almost 10 years now. Portland's been working on it. Minneapolis just made some really strong moves. There's also small towns like in Southern Oregon, like a Medford, Oregon, Greenville, North Carolina, that we've been working with. And so the policymakers, and then there's obviously the bigger regions like the Bay Area, and we're grappling with rising costs and lack of affordability. And there's creative groups that have been organized, like CASA, which is a group of local stakeholders, builders, developers, that the MTC created, that has a missing middle housing working group. And so they're pushing for state level policy change to enable missing middle housing. And this is happening internationally in Brisbane and Toronto. So it's exciting. It's exciting to see.
So it sounds like it's not just the buyers and renters who are not seeing the product they want pushing for missing middle. It sounds like there's a range of folks like you from the planning side, and also policymakers and folks in these jurisdictions.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see. And I think that there's a lot of different aspects. I think what we got most excited about is that the development community has been on board for a while, and they've jumped on board, and they're really trying to figure this out. It's everybody from NAHB, Professional Builder Magazine very early on did an article on missing middle housing. They had a section at the Housing Giants Conference on missing middle. And the ULI, it has sort of, I've been doing a lot of speaking through ULI at their state level conferences. And in this latest report they did on attainable housing, they've actually identified missing middle housing as one of the 3 tools that builders can use to achieve attainability. So it's exciting to see there's lots of different sort of disciplines and different areas of expertise sort of all realizing that there's a strong need for this and trying to figure it out. And I think the fact that we were recently hired just this past year by AARP to educate their constituency about missing middle housing and the real value of walkable living and missing middle housing choices. So that's a National Association of Realtors. So there's really broad support for this concept. That's just really exciting to see.
So we have the support there, at least. Let's be honest. On the surface, we have a lot of support. Yep. The real question, though, is going to come down to cost, right? And often urban locations and central locations that are probably maybe best for missing middle type product It's expensive to build there. It's expensive hard costs. It's expensive labor. It's expensive in terms of fees. Is there something we can do? How can we change the incentives or to get these kinds of densities? What can and should governments and policymakers do to make this more possible, more attainable?
Well, I think a few of the ways that missing middle has proven to deliver sort of more cost-effective housing is just being thoughtful and more efficient with the use of the land to try to sort of spread the land costs more across more units. Push for smaller units, but thinking very thoughtfully about the usability and the design and layout of those units. I think it's thinking about basically thinking about parking more creatively, whether it's sort of providing less parking or detaching the cost of parking from the units so that it can provide sort of a better price. Simple construction, once again, back to that type 5 construction. We found that our builder clients like to keep it to 2 stories so that because they tell us that third story and that fourth story have really exponential impacts on cost. And, I think in every market, there's going to be a slightly unique and sort of tailored solution. Like in the Bay Area, for example, a lot of places like a Berkeley or an Oakland or an Alameda, it's not likely that even if the city allowed it, that a duplex would be built in the place of a single family home. If the zoning allowed it, you might need to look at a triplex or a fourplex. There's a different sort of price and sort of unit yield threshold. And one thing I do want to mention is I really feel strongly that this conversation about the need for housing needs to shift away from this discussion about density. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to change the messaging and the framing. And I think missing middle is a really good way to do that and focus more on delivering housing choices and delivering on the fact that the market wants more choices and what those choices might look like, and that that attainability at a variety of different market segments is really pushing the need.
Yeah. I've heard there was a recent, we're seeing micro units out there sometimes, or at least people are starting to, we've had a little bit of that. A lot of times fees in cities are based though on unit count as opposed to home size. Do you see any give on that, on changing that traditional fee charging concept?
Yeah. I think it's being discussed in a lot of different places. I know in a place like the Bay Area and pretty much up and down California and places like Portland and in other parts of Oregon, like the fact that the city charges the same fee for a unit, regardless of whether it's 400 square feet or 4,000 square feet is definitely one of the reasons that, number one, we're missing smaller units, but it's also a reason that it's a barrier for missing middle housing. And I think there's a lot of policy direction. I know here in California and other parts of the country that we work that have higher impact fees to rethink that based on fees based related to the size of unit and also the context of whether it's an infill location or a greenfield or suburban location.
But you are seeing, policymakers again, folks in planning, city councils, et cetera, you are seeing that, them accept that?
I would say there's a lot of discussion right now. I would say very, very few places have stepped up and sort of made that commitment, but I do feel that will happen here in the next year. I think there'll be tremendous change on that front that will enable some more creative housing approaches.
We can hope so, but it's like moving their cheese to that old guru book, or it's like going from Blockbuster to Netflix. They're used to Blockbuster. They want to talk to that guy at the counter who knows so much about Star Trek. How about technology? You mentioned parking a second ago.
Yes.
Do you see a carless future playing a role in this and maybe opening up some other areas to this kind of product?
I think this thought of the carless future and even just mobility choices is going to play a really big role and is going to have a tremendous impact on the way we think about our communities, generally speaking. And I think based on what we're seeing is I think a lot of these changes are probably going to come from outside the development industry. I think they're going to be influenced by new players that are sort of stepping up to the plate. And I can't say much about it now, but if you come back to me in 9 to 12 months, I'll be able to show you more about what the carless future at the missing middle scale might look like.
Ooh, that's a tease.
Yes.
Damn. Okay. Well, keep that in mind, man. That's you're being mysterious. Without giving too much away and having to kill me, and Richard. And we're in different places, by the way, so that's not going to be easy. But are there other sort of technological changes you see impacting the missing middle idea?
I mean, it's really interesting to see all of this new technology that becomes the highlights of sort of the builder shows and the builder conferences. I think those are pretty minor changes that sort of the technology-wise that fit within kind of the fairly typical missing middle range of product types, but it's great to see those technological advances, but I haven't seen any yet, for example, that will have the kind of impact that the changes in mobility will have on the way we lay out our housing, the types of housing, where we build housing. So
I wonder if it might be little things, right? We're talking about stuff in urban areas often, right? What's one of the hardest things to do in urban areas? It's to go shopping, to get groceries. Now you can just call Instacart or something like that. You don't have to worry about doing that yourself. So it might just induce you a little more. And Uber is around. So just going back to the carless idea, so you can get to the club or something like that nearby. That's very close to you in that urban location. You don't have to worry about driving from your suburb. It just makes it easier to go to those kind of places and live there, I guess.
Well, and I think you're spot on with the deliveries. That is a point at which, we've gotten to the point where it's hard to figure out a business model where a small grocery store can exist like they did historically to make places more walkable. But we do have the technology where you can just use your phone to deliver groceries and maybe even have them delivered by robot.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing these little delivery robots all over downtown Berkeley delivering food on demand and other Amazon. So it's interesting.
It's fascinating. That. It's fascinating and scary. As someone who's seen most of the Terminator movies, it's also a little frightening too.
Absolutely.
Let's end with this idea. Let's talk about and end with this idea of. Do you see the missing middle concept becoming mainstream and being sort of almost universally accepted? Is that far off?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not, and I think the interest is strong and it's growing. And as a start, the missing middle housing website that we launched now 3 years ago, the number of unique viewers grows continuously. I think we're at about 40,000 unique viewers per year.
Do you ever see URL? Don't be shy, Dan. Come on.
It's www.missingmiddlehousing.com. And it's the diagram, the missing middle housing diagram that we created a few years ago, I think put the fuel on the fire, and we're seeing that being used internationally. The fact that AARP is heavily promoting this idea might be a sign that this has or is going to go mainstream and maybe needs to go mainstream to deal with our housing issues, whether you're in a small rural town or a big city. And, we're also finding that, I mentioned this earlier, but community members can easily understand this concept and are not afraid of the range of these missing middle types in the same way that they are a little bit afraid of the concepts of density and multifamily. So I think as a communication tool, it's pretty effective. So I guess I'm excited to say that I think this missing middle housing concept and really now a movement that we started is becoming mainstream, and I'm really glad about that because I think our cities and towns all across the country really do need this.
Well, let's end there because that's a nice optimistic. I was going to ask you who's still against it, but let's not just bring everybody down. So let's just end there because I think so. I mean, I agree. I think this is every time we do a feasibility study where it has this product that you're talking about. It's amazing how sometimes the sales agents are surprised by how much older their buyer profile is than they expected.
Yes.
But it is every time. You should stop being surprised. Well, this is great, Dan. I appreciate your help with us understanding this concept. Hopefully, folks are going to respond to it and ask more questions. I appreciate it.
And what I would say, well, thank you for having me. And what I would say is if it makes any sense, for example, to include the missing middle diagram on where you post, post the blog post on your website, we're happy to share that with you if we haven't already. Because we just find that when people see the diagram, it's just easy to understand,
Yeah.
regardless of you're, not an architect, not a planner, not a developer. So it's really impactful in that way. But this was fun. Thanks for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for coming on. All right, that was the latest edition of the New Home Insights, the podcast by John Burns. I'm Dean Worley for Rich Amonas. See you next time.